Okay, I'll start this time.
You start this time.
Okay, so Michael and I are starting a podcast. This is something that Michael's been talking about probably for at least a couple years now. And it's not really something that I had a particular interest in, but you brought it up again recently, maybe about a month ago, and for some reason this time I felt a lot more open to it. I felt like we could get a lot out of it by just sitting and talking together. And also, what's really great about podcasting or whatever this is going to be is that it's so easy. We have the equipment right in our home. We don't have to go to a studio. We can just sit down and talk and do it around stuff that's interesting, and people can listen if they want to, and if they don't want to listen, then nobody has to, and maybe it's just Michael and I. We go back and we post it and then we look at all of our views on YouTube, and
oh great,
and all the views are us viewing ourselves.
So this is 2 yogis, 1 cave. I think that the biggest reason why I wanted to do this was because of the name. Not really. Was because of my wife. And I think it'll be really cool to go deeper into conversation about these things that we talk about during our leisurely time. And you can also be informed about it too by just listening to our podcasts, by making fun of us when you see one of us snort or drink our water in funny ways, all that good stuff. And today's topic is about meditation.
And I'm actually teaching a class right now, an 8-week course on, Michael knows this, on the chakras, and tomorrow is week 7. So we're studying the crown chakra. And we were sitting here like wondering, what are we going to do tonight? And I was just thinking, while Michael was getting his pizza ready, that I would love to just sit and talk to Michael about the crown chakra tonight. And what would be a better reason to talk about the crown chakra than to actually do our first podcast together?
Yeah.
Which I had said to him a couple days ago, what do you think our first subject should be? And Michael said,
what is meditation?
What is meditation? And so I was like, oh, it's going to go together so well. And so I'm really excited just to explore it. And this stuff, it is stuff that we talk about. We talk about it naturally. Our business revolves around it. Like our inner lives revolve around it. And yet at the same time, I was saying to some girls at Gulbahar's baby's first birthday party the other day that sometimes when we get caught up in our stuff, like we can go a couple of weeks without like really having a meaningful conversation. And I mean, not to like, and I'm totally okay with that. But when that happens, then I get really excited when we do have a meaningful conversation. Like it sticks out in my mind. And so doing this podcast, I think it's just another way for us to make sure that we're having really meaningful conversations, and the things that we're saying is stuff that I think we both studied enough that what we can share and talk about is stuff that people can benefit from.
Definitely. Yeah. And I know you've read a lot about this, especially recently, and I've read a lot about this. And we've also had our own experiences with it, which is pretty neat. Dating back to years and years ago, really. So this will be a really neat experiment. Thank you for joining us on the very first episode, and let's get into it. First question.
Okay, well, so I think we're like, I want to start just as you talk about dating back. Is my first experiences with meditation. So when I was 20 years old, I went to yoga teacher training program, and that was a little intensive program. It was 28 days long, and we would basically have some type of yoga class from 6 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. And so meditation was the second thing that we did every day. The first thing that we did every day was something called Shot Karma, which is bodily cleansing exercises for people who haven't been studying yoga for a long time. Bodily cleansing exercises help prepare the physical body and also open up like subtle energy channels so that meditation can be facilitated more easily. So that was first, and then we had a meditation section which lasted, I think, from 6:30 a.m. to 8 a.m. every day. that being said, we didn't actually sit and meditate for an hour and a half. We learned breathing exercises, and I think we practiced teaching the breathing exercises, and then I think 20 minutes of that 90-minute slot, we would sit in meditation every day. And I remember when I did it for the first time, like that was my least favorite part of the training program. Like I would just sit there and feel bored out of my mind. So that's where meditation started for me, and obviously it's evolved a lot. That was 14 years ago, and I know we'll get into more of it, but I think I wanted to share my initial experience with meditation and talk about how much I disliked it, because it's not easy, and it's not like just this magical thing. And I mean, I actually, as I say this, I'm like, I know Michael's experiences were kind of different from mine, but I think my experience reflects the norm more than yours does, where it's like someone starts meditation and they're just bored out of their mind. Like how great or horrible is it to actually sit down and just close my eyes and have to stop thinking, which never happens. I mean, especially like when we're novices at it. And I mean, and I shouldn't even say novices, because now it's 14 years later, and it's just as much I close my eyes, and it's hardly that my mind stops at all. But I mean, and 14 years ago, I was much more disturbed in my mind than I am now. So it's like to close my eyes and have to actually just have my thoughts in front of me was horrible. And so I'll conclude my initial exposure to meditation by saying that the only thing that kept me intermittently meditating, not consistently, because it took me 6 or 7 years to be consistent with it, but the only thing that kept me doing it intermittently was the fact that there were so many people that I respected that told me that meditation was important. So I did persist. And I'll pause there and see what your thoughts are.
So, as you said, we have talked about this before and seem to have opposite experiences with meditation. However, I will tell you that through watching movies, through being in martial arts, I always wanted to meditate. Like, it was something that, for me, was a peak experience of both the physical, of being like a samurai, if you will, martial artist, and also of contemplation or meditation. So I had exposure through martial arts, but I think it was also kind of TV and media's whole ideology of it being the bridge of two worlds, of this peaceful meditative experience and yet this warrior heart physical experience. And I always admired that growing up. So I think I first tried to meditate when I was maybe 16 years old, just had an idea of what it was, and I did it on my bed, and 3 seconds in, I had an itch on my face, and my lower back started killing because I did not do yoga then, and my dad will tell you that I could hardly touch my knees when I did a forward bend. And as well, my thoughts were everywhere, so I didn't really know what I was doing. I didn't know to concentrate on breath. I didn't know where I was going, and I'm a very goal-oriented person anyways, so I feel like for me to sit and stop and shut everything off, and that was my idea of what it was, of what meditation was, that all my thoughts were all of a sudden going to stop, and I was going to see the great light and go into that light and live happily ever after. It was a terrible expectation to have. So I would go through periods, and maybe once every 6 months, through high school or even in college, where I would read these great authors like Henry David Thoreau, and these Eastern authors as well, such as Lao Tzu and those types of people, and just think, man, I really want to practice this because these guys talk about contemplation a lot. And I could never do it by myself until I finally started to go to a place called the School of Metaphysics when I was 24, I think it was. And that's where Brynn and I first met. Mm-hmm. For all you listeners who are probably not listening, you probably all know us and know of this already, but maybe 15 years in the future, when you go back and listen to this and you don't know anything about us. You know that we came from the School of Metaphysics. So anyways, we're at the School of Metaphysics. I start to meditate, and I literally force myself into meditation. I sit against a wall. Everything hurts in my body, but I'm just continuing to bring my attention back to the present moment. Bring my attention back to the present moment. Bring my attention back to the present moment. Listen to my breath. And I liked this. This was a goal for me to do. All of a sudden, my teacher at the time had set a goal for me. So now I knew where I was headed with meditation. And after a while, it became easier. 5 minutes turned into 10 minutes. 10 minutes turned into 15 minutes, and on and on and on. To where I would start experiencing some pretty cool experiences in the beginning. Because I have a very imaginative mind as well. But I really appreciated meditating, and I really appreciated the other exercises I learned in one-pointed concentration, so much so that obviously for you and I, it's a daily practice.
I think one important thing that you said that I thought about this in different ways while you were talking is, well, the most recent thing you said was having a teacher. And as we talk, I recognize how important having a teacher is. And before you even mentioned your teacher kind of showing you different things, I'm just thinking about the fact that meditation really isn't that complex. Although I think for somebody who hasn't really put their attention on these types of things before, when they think about meditation, they're just like, I don't know how to do that. And so there's really just this barrier of thinking that it's this complicated thing that we have to learn how to do. And at the very least, what a teacher does is provide some structure. Like a teacher validates, actually, meditation is as simple as doing this, which in the tradition that we study and teach at Elemental Yoga, which we received in the tradition of Baba Hari Das from the Mount Madonna Center, he's teaching classical yoga from the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And so when we look at defining meditation, we're looking at one-pointed concentration. And so meditation really is as simple as picking an object of your choice to focus on, putting your attention on it, and then when you get distracted, noticing that you get distracted and putting your attention back on the object. Honestly, it seems like the most boring thing in the world. And since I am just talking, somewhat defining what meditation is, I'll go a little bit further. Initially, what we call meditation in like a popular sense, when we're talking about it on the street, it is that practice of bringing your awareness back to the point of focus. Although classically, meditation is defined, it's the 7th limb and the 8 limbs of classical Ashtanga yoga, and the 6th limb is concentration, which is really what we're doing. We're putting our attention on an object, our mind is wandering, we're putting our attention back on it. And then when we get to an actual state of meditation, the mind has become much more focused, and so we have this ability to put our attention on one thing for an extended period of time. And that being said, when we can put our attention unbroken on something for an extended period of time, meditation then becomes something even greater, which is the mind and the object of concentration don't become separate in the mind's eye. It's like the mind and the object of concentration have merged into this unified thing. And when I think about what does that mean practically, the mind is merged to be a unified thing with something else. The Yoga Sutras defines that we actually understand the qualities of the things. We understand its physical qualities. We understand its mental qualities. We understand its spatial relationship. We understand like how it occupies or moves within time. And there's lots of levels of this deeper state of meditation samadhi, which I can only talk about through what I've read in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. So I'm just speak about it from an intellectual level. But yeah, that's a little bit about what a meditation actually is.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate a little bit about the fact that you made the point that concentration and meditation are different. And what we normally call meditation here in the West is really just the attempt to concentrate. That there's these masters like Patanjali, who wrote the Yoga Sutras, or there's several others like Baba Hari Das, and Paramahansa Yogananda, and these people that talk about meditation who have a much more experiential claim, maybe you can say, to meditation just through their practice. So when they speak of meditation, they already assume, in a way, unless they're teaching to Westerners, but if they're talking about meditation, they already assume you're good at one point in concentration, that you can hold your attention on your mind, that on the object, when the mind starts to float away from that object, that you put it right back. And eventually, that's just the one point of concentration part. Eventually, the mind flows to that object with no other qualms, no other disturbances in the mind. So it's not that, I'm thinking about the water in my cup and the water in my cup and the water in my cup, and I wonder if it's the same water as other people's cups, and what about the other designs on people's cups? Do they have the same cup I have? It's, and then I go, oh, wait, I'm thinking about water in the cup, water in the cup. No, these guys have a stream of consciousness flow into the water in the cup, 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 and they're holding it there. And after a certain amount of time, only is that called meditation. And I like that distinction because, again, me being the goal-oriented person that I am, I like to have something to work towards that is, to me, something phenomenal. That's something that I haven't met a ton of people who can get into that state quickly or who have practiced that state a lot. It's more that we're here practicing one point of concentration. And I also think that it's a cultural thing too. That maybe if we lived in the East, it'd be a little bit different. But maybe not.
Yeah, I wonder even if we had lived, and maybe we did, like 2,000 years ago, and there's not just distractions abounding everywhere, that it may have been easier for the collective to get into a deeper state of meditation. I can't quote him verbatim, but I'm just thinking of, like, I have heard of I can't remember his name, the most famous Buddhist there is, like the Grand Buddha, the Pope of Buddhas.
Siddhartha Gautama?
No, he's alive now. Like the one that they pass on.
Oh, the Dalai Lama?
Yeah.
Yeah, him. The funny guy.
Yeah, him just talking about how he even said that he feels that his mind is distracted. Yeah. And I mean, just as well, so as you're talking about this and talking about what a profound experience it is, I guess I was just listening to this audiobook by George, I won't pronounce his name right. It's George in English, but it's like Feuerstein. And he's like an amazing historian of yoga, and he's written tons of different books, but the one I most recently listened to is called The Lost Teachings of Yoga, and it's basically an outline of the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali. And so he's just taking his time to go through what yoga is in a more classical way than what the West usually perceives it as. Although I don't know what the West anymore collectively perceives yoga to be. I think that the meditative aspects of yoga continue to infuse our awareness more and more. But anyways, he was talking about, and this is just to draw a contrast or maybe just to like create a little more fullness around what you're saying about meditation is an amazing accomplishment, and one of the dangers and is that a person can become so adept at meditation, and yet if they're not cultivating the areas and if they're not cultivating themselves in other areas of their lives, even if they can sit and meditate in one point of concentration for an hour at a time, they're still going to have aspects of their psyche that they have to deal with. They're still going to have like a shadow side. They're still going to have difficulty in relating with other people. Like they're still going to have their own lusts and perversions and things like that. That meditation by itself like doesn't suddenly wipe everything out. That we have to take the practice of meditation and very intentionally translate it out into the world around us.
Yeah, and I think that goes into something else, which is that yoga is twofold in a way. It's about experience and liberation from that experience. And the experience part is really important. I know it wasn't that long ago, several years ago, when I was first learning about meditation and getting really, really maybe obsessed with it, you could say, really trying to attain a certain state of my mind. I wanted to go live in India with the yogis in the caves. I wanted to throw away all this Western stuff and just go, I'm done with this. I relinquish it, and I just want to go to my cave, which I think, one, would have probably made me insane, and two, I had nothing to relinquish. I had no experience to relinquish yet. So I've really given a lot of thought and attention to physical experience, emotional experience, mental experience, that maybe I wasn't thinking about before. And at the same time, I think meditation, it just goes to show how much meditation can be medicinal. It can be a cure to different areas of hardship in our lives, or different areas of maybe a search for meaning. I know that's the reason why I started metaphysical practices and meditation and concentration, was because I didn't understand what purpose I had in life. And I remember having an ex-partner of mine, and she was my sweetheart in college, and we continued to date after that. And I specifically remember walking one day and just being like, man, I'm 24, like maybe I could marry this person, and maybe I'm not going to marry this person. And kind of just weighing things. And the thing that kept sticking out in my mind was, we get married, or we find a career, one of the two, we get married, we have kids, and we die. And that to me was this big existential thought that drove me towards breaking up with her. And again, she's a great person, but breaking up with her and having to go find some sort of meaning in my own life. Because I just didn't have that experience and didn't want to have the same life that I saw that other people have. Again, 24, totally delusional in what people's lives are and what they meant. And I'm still learning about it. But that was my thought process. And when I found meditation, all of a sudden I found something that could help me, a tool to get to where I wanted to.
Yeah, and I guess just to be fair to you, like saying that you're delusional, that you were delusional or downplaying yourself, those moments in time where we have those crises and actually choose to step away from what we're doing, I think are really, they are pivotal moments in life. And what if you had decided to stay, and what if you had decided to quiet that urge? Then who knows?
Yeah.
What would have happened? You may have been much less content doing what you're doing.
We wouldn't be having this podcast, probably.
We definitely wouldn't be having this podcast.
That'd be bad news for all of our listeners and viewers out there.
So I had the similar sentiment that Michael had about like wanting to I knew growing up, but even before I was necessarily a yogi, when I was Mrs. Ultra Christian, because that's what I was until I was about 18 years old, I knew that like everything was going to be about living for God. And maybe I don't know if I visualized myself living in monasteries, because I knew I wanted to have a partner, but I knew that I wasn't going to settle for what I perceived to be an inadequate life. And there would just be moments in time growing up where I felt like I saw the people around me going through the motions, and they didn't understand why they were going through the motions. And I know that's exactly what you're citing is, well, just waking up and realizing that how much have I been going through the motions, and what do I really want? And I feel like I've been on this path for a long time of saying I'm not going to go through the motions. And the interesting thing is that on the other side of it, when I finally moved back to Fort Worth, I left Fort Worth to go to college and then traveled and study yoga so that I was gone for 7 years. But when I finally came back, I was 24. So we both kind of had interesting moments at 24. I was coming back around to realize that actually I do need to do all those things that seemed like going through the motions. I do need to have a job. I do need to go to the grocery store. I hated going to the grocery store growing up. I do need to take care of my whatever, insurance and stuff like that. But I realized that it's not so much that I have to renounce those things and not do them. It's just that I have to bring a fullness of mind and a fullness of heart into those things. And so that's a journey I'm on now, is just learning how to bring a sense of fullness into the things that we do. And I can definitely speak to, even having had the yoga studio for almost 10 years now, there are definitely people initially would be like, oh, you run a yoga studio, like your life must be amazing. But there were years where my life was horrible. And it was because I wasn't able to implement the type of mindfulness and an initiative that I wanted to outside of just teaching my classes. I would teach my classes and then I would feel like I'd go home and kind of feel like I was in a mental rut, because even though I had the yoga studio, it wasn't really, I didn't know, like I knew I didn't want a yoga studio per se. I knew I wanted to share the teachings of yoga and I didn't know how to do it. And so I've spent so many years trying to figure out, like, how do I share and live these teachings. And I'm pretty happy with where we are.
Yeah, definitely happy.
Yeah, I mean, starting to do stuff like this and starting the teacher training programs, and we have our mind arts classes, which I was doing more occasionally before you came on and actually branded the mind arts classes, where there are these 8-week semesters. I had done 3 classes kind of spaced out throughout the years prior that I was so excited about, like the one that we're actually about to rerun at the studio, which is, it's called Understanding Yoga. And so this was the first course I ever taught that gave me an opportunity to share with people beyond just the physical poses about what yoga is, where we look at the history of it, the philosophy of it, and also it's the modern way that people live it. And so that's something that you and I are going to teach together again this April for the first time in like maybe 5 or 6, even 7 years since the first round. So I'm really excited about that. I guess you might have something to say, although I'm thinking about, well, I guess I'm just curious to kind of explore like this application. Well, one is the application of meditation in daily living, but then also I think we maybe can walk people through a little bit more about like literally defining what meditation is, or how people can practice it.
Yeah, I think that for me personally, I think it does take some sort of, not necessarily sitting or laying down or being prone, I guess that's the same thing. For me, if you're going to look at meditation, it is that your physical body is stopped in some way. You might be floating in a float tank or something, but that's meditation to me, because I can stop my body. Okay, that's something I can control. Never going to stop the thoughts, but I can control them. I can have some sort of control over them and say, okay, I'm going to pick something as my object, right? Again, I can pick this cup in front of me. The cup's my object. I could close my eyes, visualize the cup, bring up the cup in my mind, and hold my attention there. And every time it moves, I place it back on the cup. And I may have a timer for this. I personally like to have timers during meditation because usually right away I'm kind of on to the next thing.
You want to bail out, or...
Yeah, I don't want to... Exactly.
The timer keeps you accountable.
Timer keeps me accountable. And also, just in the back of my head, sometimes I'm worried, oh, well, what if I go past these allotted minutes, then what? Then the next task isn't going to get done, or all of that stuff kind of goes through my head. even though that's most likely not going to happen. However, yeah. But yes, it totally takes away any sort of thought about bailing out. It takes away any sort of fallacy about going too long. So it's a good thing to me. So that to me is meditation, is your body stopped and you're doing that type of practice while you're moving during the day, while I'm, driving a car, or while I'm walking around or running or working out or doing a yoga class, bringing my attention to the present moment, whether I'm bringing it to my breath, whether I'm bringing it towards the person I'm listening to or talking to. That to me is mindfulness. That's a mindfulness practice. I'm bringing my attention to my senses in some way. In meditation, I'm actually bringing my attention to an object, just like I said, like I could be doing it with mindfulness too. But as I bring that to the object, my attention's actually going inwards, which starts to emphasize one sense, which if I was visualizing, it would be the sense of sight, even though it's an inward sight, and lessen the rest. So, or if I was doing some sort of like nod yoga, sound meditation, then it would be the sense of sound that would be doing this. And again, dulling the rest of them and hoping that these senses, the ones that are dull, follow the leaders inwards. And then, I lose, there's a bunch of maybe words for this. I lose body consciousness. I'm not aware of my physical experience in front of me. Yeah, people call it different things. You could call it in the Ashtanga Yoga, it's pratyahara, which is sense withdrawal. And that'd be a true sense withdrawal if you lost bodily consciousness. But if we do that while we're driving, if I were to put my attention on what I'm trying to visualize in my head and, I've got all this other stimulus around me, it's not going to work. And I hope it doesn't work, because if it does work, well, then I'm causing something that is not in my best interest or in the best interest of others.
Can I interrupt you?
You can interrupt me.
I just have to say a pet peeve of mine, which is, I'm just thinking about conversations throughout the years, and actually I'm this conversation I'm thinking of, oh no, I guess this would have happened like 3 or 4 years ago, so I would have been meditating regularly. But I'm sorry, I feel like I sound judgmental, and I am. It's like if the conversation comes up and we're talking, oh, do you meditate? And then someone says, oh, I tend to live meditatively. I'm like, that is the biggest BS I've ever heard. All of that, like, if you cannot start a meditation practice by saying that you live meditatively, like that's an excuse to just keep putting off the practice of actually creating a formal seated meditation practice. I think when someone says they live meditatively, they're simply saying that they're like open to life, they're curious, they're an adventurer.
Sure.
Maybe they stop and they slow down and like they acknowledge their senses from time to time.
Which is mindfulness. That's like a mindfulness thing. It
is mindfulness. But here's the other thing. It's like, this is a good thing to do those. However, one of the biggest problems of mindfulness, not meditation, but just living mindfully, is the fact that I think for many people, and I guess I'm projecting my own experience out, but before a person starts to do work on their mind, the mind tends to be pretty freaking negative. Like it tends to just spit out the same dumb thoughts over and over again, which really prevent a person from even spending that much time in mindfulness. So maybe they get like little snippets of it, but then all the negativity of the mind keeps coming back up again. So I guess this is my thought. Living meditatively is a good thing. However, to say like, do you meditate? I think really necessitates a formal practice in which Michael's describing. I think he described it really well, in which the body becomes still. And ideally, a person is seated instead of lying down, although I've done my fair share of meditations laying down. The problem with laying down is that, especially when the mind is not used to going into this somewhat slower state of consciousness, the only thing it knows to do is go to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So then if I say I'm going to do my laying down meditation and I'm a beginner at it, the moment that my mind slows down, I'm just going to sleep right away. Also, other scenarios is if I do my meditation laying down and I'm tired, then the tiredness is just going to kick in, even if I have the ability to stay somewhat present when the mind slows down. So yeah, just reiterating the formal seated practice. And you had mentioned like keeping your attention on one thing. You mentioned the cup. I feel like it's really helpful to give realistic objects of meditation.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to give a couple, and I'll let
Sure.
Michael name a couple. So usually an image of a deity is a really good place to start. And, you know, if they're, as I say that, I'm like, oh, well, there could be people listening being like, well, there's only one God. Like, and so
Sure.
I just want to say, too, that, like, I completely agree with this sentiment that there is only one God. Although the word God is so charged, it's like I just don't even, it's hard for me to even use the word and connect with it when I use it. I mean, I can sometimes, but the reason is because the whole collective consciousness has put their baggage on the term God. So anyways, when we say the word deity, I mean, we're really just thinking about like an elevated vibrational force that mythologically like represents some type of quality that we want to emanate. So then within Hinduism, there's lots of different gods and goddesses. And then within Christianity, there's different saints or just holy people in general. I do think this is probably the best place to start because we can project onto these images all of our love and devotion and worship. And the thing about, like, when we're looking at the functioning of the mind, that it's not really about the thing that I'm projecting my sense of worshipfulness and devotion onto. It's actually about me cultivating that quality inside of myself. The more I cultivate a quality of devotion inside of myself, the more it raises my own vibrational essence. However, so that being said, there are definitely people who don't like the idea of focusing on any sort of deity, and so then I think we go more towards like earthy symbols,
Sure.
like the moon or a tree or things like that. And when we look at like the philosophy of yoga, yoga's teaching that like everything in this world is made up of the same 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air, and space. And those 5 elements are made up of what's called the 3 gunas, which are sattva, rajas, and tamas, which is consciousness, activity, and inertia. That consciousness, activity, and inertia make up everything in this universe, which is why whether I focus on a tree or I focus on the moon or I focus on a sun, eventually in deeper states of connectedness, which is the meditation process, that front image of the sun or the moon or whatever it is going to fall away. Mm-hmm. And that's not even the thing that we're connected with anymore. We're actually just connecting more with like the elemental forces of creation.
Well said.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I think too, it's really good. To me, visualization meditation is something I use constantly. It's my kind of go-to. And I've experienced a lot at certain times when things like sound meditation would help me. And I would concentrate on first maybe the room, like the buzzing of the refrigerator, the buzzing of the light. And eventually, if I sat there long enough and didn't have my thoughts go everywhere, I would experience maybe an inner sound would come up in some way. And it could sound a lot like the buzzing of the light, but I knew in my heart that it was something in my head, in my mind, not really in my head, in my mind, as opposed to something out there. And then the deeper that this got, then I became even more sure. And that's a subject for a different time too, to go deeper into that. But to just hear these other sounds that would come up and to concentrate on those and see what that did to kind of the screen of my consciousness at the time, what I was seeing inside of my head. And then there's things like just sitting down and concentrating on your breath, on the inhale coming in through the nose, On the exhale, coming out of the nose or out of the mouth. And this is, I feel like, usually visualization is good if people have kind of a solid memory or can, close their eyes and picture every little detail of their car. But if they don't and they're like, hey, I'm not a visualizer, which is it's not true. You just need to practice visualization. But if you're like, hey, I don't really like that, start with the breath. Inhaling, exhaling. Inhaling, exhaling. You can even count. Inhale 1, exhale 1. Inhale 2, exhale 2. Inhale 3, exhale 3. Some people like to attach a mantra onto this as well. I am love, I am love. I am love, I am love. Something like that could be a thing. Or it could even be
sounds.
I had this
Focus on.
Well, we were just talking about sounds. We had breath. I have it. So sometimes if people come and they really want to get attached to or have their meditation on something that makes them feel good, and usually this thing is like love or joy. So when someone comes into my meditation class and they say that to me, I'll often have them bring up an experience where they can easily connect to love or joy. Maybe they think of their kids. Maybe they think about when they were a kid and they went to the beach.
Their dog,
right? Like Aurora, gorgeous Aurora. But these things that make them, in some way, whenever they think of this, it touches their heart. And it's that little tingly feeling that touches your heart when you bring up that visualization in your mind. That's actually really, really good to concentrate on, because this starts to open up your heart. You'll hear people call this the heart chakra, and lead to deeper experiences and more pleasant experiences just in daily life.
Thank you. I just wanted to put Aurora up in the viewing screen because she's so precious, and just to hold her for a little bit longer.
Great. And she's wearing her yoga pants because she's in heat, which is
wearing
perfect.
Her yoga pants. So cute. Michael and I talk about Aurora probably for like 10% of the day.
Yeah, you're right.
Okay, so I was saying different things to focus on, and then you were talking about like cultivating an emotional experience that helps you feel good, and I think that this ability to cultivate like a certain emotion within the body it's a wonderful place to start. And even saying that, like me being many years into practice now, like it's better than a place to start. Like it's a good place to continue revisiting. Mm-hmm. I was just trying to think about this today, like in defining what is meditation and how could it be something that is immediately beneficial, because it needs to be relevant to our minds. And there was so many times when I'd be meditating and I would be doing it because I knew it was the right thing to do, but I wasn't actually like emotionally connected to the experience. I was just doing it to create the discipline. But I was thinking like another way to define something like meditation is every day to take myself to that place where I'm going above the roller coaster of thoughts. And how does that even happen? And I think that like doing a visualization can be helpful, because when I was journaling that today, like the image that I had of myself was like me floating in like a clear lake in the water, and just being connected to a certain spaciousness. And so there is something really powerful about images and emotion to, even for however briefly, like connect us into that point of like a long exhalation, like let me get away from all of this busy chattering of the mind, which I think is like looking at what's the point. I'm like I can talk. I did initially talk about like the ultimate point is this connectedness. I want to say connectivity.
That was interesting.
I know. Well, I'm just trying to like figure out how to pronounce the word connectivity. It doesn't matter. like ultimately, like meditation is this connection, and I also want to, like, the connection I think happens first between body, mind, and soul, and union to whatever object we're perceiving, and like recognizing that fundamentally there's a sameness underlying it. And then ultimately meditation leads to like the soul transcending the physical body. But I feel like it's so far from where we are at this moment in time that it's really important to look at the practical benefits of meditation today. And I think the easiest way to describe the benefits of meditation today is that the mind just moves endlessly. And as I was mentioning a few minutes ago, when we haven't trained it, like, it's usually moving in a negative direction. And to be able to at least slow that down, to at least like recognize that these thoughts are happening. I'm not even saying that in meditation we're going to stop them and reverse them, but we're at least like becoming privy to the process of what our mind does to us, and how many ways that it doesn't serve us, and like slowly reprogramming ourselves by slowing down the thoughts and recognizing that like there is another way. There's another way than actually just following this train of thoughts down this endless vicious cycle. And meditation can help me to become aware of that and to slowly start to cultivate the other way.
Yeah. I think if you have more to say about meditation, great. I'm thinking the whole thing with the crown chakra that we've promised our gracious audience.
Oh, that
here.
we're going to talk about it?
Yeah, should probably actually wait till another podcast.
Oh.
What do you think about that?
I mean, you're probably right. Then I'm like, but I'm teaching the class on it tomorrow, and I really want to explore it now.
Okay. You want to explore it now?
Oh my gosh.
I feel like it's another hour conversation at least. I feel like, how about we'll stop this podcast. Maybe we'll even do a second podcast tonight on the crown chakra. But let's stop meditation there. And that way we don't exhaust everything. Okay. We don't go way, way over right now. And thank you all for listening very much. We appreciate it. This is our first episode of 2 Yogis, 1 Cave. Maybe 2 and a 4th Yogis and
2
1
yogis,
cave.
1 tiny baby who's so precious.
That's right.
So precious.
We will upload this as fast as possible, and we'll have the next one up, who knows, by maybe tonight, maybe next week. Thank you all very much.
Thanks.